Thanks for tuning in to Curious Cat, the podcast that examines the shadowy space where science and the supernatural collide. I'm your host, Jennifer Holtz. Join me every week as I explore what it means to be a soul in a meat suit. Welcome to Curious Cat. Last week, we ventured along the East Coast, specifically Florida's famed Space Coast, to share the story of a civil rights couple who was killed by the KKK. We went a few miles inland to rewrite our old school programming about ancient civilizations, thanks to scientific analysis of soft tissue matter, bones, bottle gourds, and fabrics preserved for somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 years. And this week, well, the East Coast can't have all the spotlight and glory, can it? I'm looking closely at some of the weirdness along Central California's coast. Let's get into it. California's central coastline is as close as the U.S. will ever come to having a neutral Switzerland-like landmass. I'll explain. The Central Coast holds space between proud, edgy NorCal and always ready for its close-up SoCal with grace and dignity and patience. Like twin children, the North and South claim the best bits for themselves. Big Sur, Hearst Castle, Madonna Inn, while Central California inhales salty ocean mist through its nose and nestles behind the fog-capped mountain peaks, exhaling and watching the skirmish. I don't want an in-basket of grumpy emails, so I'm not going to define the boundaries of Central California, but drive along the coast and it's a feeling more than a GPS location. Rocky in places, desolate, sandy, productive, showy and shy. This is my favorite part of the Golden State. Inland is the nation's salad bowl, the Central Valley, cared for by salt of the earth people that if you take the time to ask their story would uplift your tired heart in these tumultuous times. Immigrants, small business owners, teachers, researchers, mechanics, truck drivers, ag engineers, diner servers, and food slingers. I'd argue the vast majority of which would give you the last dollar in their wallet if you asked. I know these places well. One summer, my father was director of a research project for the USDA. We spent weekends driving the Central Valley. My father, this bright blonde hair and blue eyes that crinkled at the edges when he smiled, would approach people picnicking in public parks to ask questions. His ability to make people laugh in Spanish and English helped people drop their guards for just a few minutes. Sometimes they would nod to others in the distance as if to say, this guy is okay, and soon we'd have more people to poll. When the results of those research polls were tabulated, the story the data told was the exact opposite of the racist tropes common at the time in other parts of the U.S. The facts do not lie. The heart of Central Valley agriculture were immigrants. They were the tall trees of their families in their home countries. They worked hard in rough conditions and sent most of what they earned back home, an income that might stretch over 9 months there. They were heroes with dirt beneath their fingernails, brave, strong, and some would come to live in the U.S. permanently, own their own bit of land, and employ other people. The Central Valley in the summer is hot, and the air quality can be bad. Back in the 80s, they said it was the farm equipment that created that smog. But later on, studies showed the Bay Area's smog, due to cars and trucks mostly, blew into the valley and stayed there. There are stretches of road I could play back for you on a screen. I know them so well. While others I forgot the moment we passed the next mile marker, dusty and indescript. 1 mile marker has a sign that tells passersby that this is the spot where James Dean died. Yeah, probably the best known place on the Central Coast is the site where young film star James Dean passed away, crashing his Porsche in 1955. I found an article in the LA Times archive, and there are links to it in the show notes, who writes, James Dean, 24, one of Hollywood's brightest new motion picture stars, was killed early last night in a head-on collision at the rural town of Cholame, about 19 miles east of Paso Robles, the California Highway Patrol reported. The young actor met death in his German-built Porsche sports car while en route to road races at Salinas. Patrolmen said Dean was dead on arrival at the Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital following the crash at the intersection of State Highway 41 and US 466. His mechanic, identified by highway patrolmen as Rolf Wutheridge, about 27, of Hollywood, suffered a fractured jaw, fractured hip, and body lacerations. He was described as in moderately serious condition. The CHIP office at San Luis Obispo said a car driven by Donald Turnipseed of Tulare made a left turn on Highway 41 while traveling east, colliding almost head-on with Dean's tiny sports car. Investigators said Turnipseed suffered minor injuries. An attending physician was quoted as saying Dean died instantly at about 5:30 p.m. from a broken neck, numerous broken bones, and several lacerations over the entire body. The Indiana-born star left Hollywood with Wutheridge several hours before that fatal crash for a weekend of racing at Salinas. He had just this week completed a role in Giant, the film version of Edna Ferber's book about Texas. He became a sports car racing enthusiast only last spring, shortly after he rocketed to stardom in East of Eden, made from the John Steinbeck story of early days in the Salinas Valley. Under contract to Warner Brothers Studios, the intense young star frequently had been compared to Marlon Brando, and both were products of director Elia Kazan's School for Tyro Actors. Dean's activity in television earned him his first motion picture role, plus parts in 2 New York plays, See the Jaguar and The Immortalist. Another film, still unreleased at the time of this publishing, which Dean has the starring role, is Rebel Without a Cause, made at Warner's last summer. Born in Marion, Indiana in February 1931, Dean attended Santa Monica Junior College, later transferring to UCLA, where he majored in drama. He left UCLA to seek an acting job in New York and won the David Bloom Award for Promising Newcomers several years ago, the accolade helping him to starring roles in such dramatic television programs as Studio One, You Are There, and Television Playhouse. George Stevens, who produced and directed Dean's last picture, termed the young star's death a great tragedy. He had extraordinary talent. One of Jimmy's co-stars in Giant, Elizabeth Taylor, broke down when the news reached her, saying this, "I can't believe it. I'm just stunned." That was all she could say. Stevens and Warner Brothers said Dean had been forbidden to enter any sports car races while the picture was in production. A studio photographer, Sanford Roth, a few miles behind the Dean Speedster, told the CHIP that Dean had just received delivery on the new car and was anxious to race it following the enforced studio layoff. Ironically, Dean decided at the last minute to drive the sports car to Salinas. Stevens said the actor originally planned to travel north in his station wagon, but changed his mind in favor of driving the small car just before departure time. Dean was unmarried. He leaves his father, Winton A. Dean, a dental technician at Veterans Hospital Hospital, Sawtell. Okay, people still visit this site often. There's a nearby diner, too, that displays James Dean memorabilia, history bits, and the food is decent as well. Why do people not even born when the actor died still come to the place? Well, the answer is complicated. His movies are still available is one reason. He was cut down at 24 years old and the start of what was already shaping up to be an epic film career. And then there's the lore surrounding the car he drove, many calling every last bolt and bit of it cursed. My husband was even offered up to buy a piece of that jinxed car long ago by a Washington state collector. Here's more about that ill-fated Porsche 555 Spyder, nicknamed the Little Bastard. And by the way, 1 week before that fatal accident, actor Alec Guinness warned James Dean about the car. This from Hollywood Reporter. In a 1977 interview on the BBC's Parkinson talk show, Unearthed by Heat Vision, a somber Guinness recalls how he warned the young man that if he drove that car, he would be killed. That conversation took place the evening of September 23rd, 1955, just 1 week prior. It all happened when Guinness and a friend were turned away from a packed restaurant in Hollywood, so they began to head elsewhere. Then I heard feet running down the street, and it was James Dean, Guinness began. He said, "I was in that restaurant and you couldn't get a table. My name is James Dean. Would you please come and sit with me?" At the time, Guinness had numerous film credits to his name and an Oscar nomination for The Lavender Hill Mob, so clearly Dean knew he was a big deal. Guinness and his friend agreed and started back, but before they went inside, Dean wanted to show off his new car, Guinness recalled. There in the courtyard of this little restaurant was this little silver thing, very smart, all done up in cellophane with a bunch of roses tied to its bonnet, Guinness told Parkinson, adding that he asked how fast it could go. Dean replied it would do 150 miles per hour. I said, "Have you driven it?" And he said, "No, I have never been in it at all." And some strange thing came over me, some almost different voice, and I said, "Look, I won't join your table unless you want me to, but I must say something. Please do not get into that car, because if you do," and I looked at my watch and I said, "If you get into that car at all, it's now Friday actually, 10 o'clock at night, and by 10 o'clock at night next Thursday, you'll be dead if you get into that car." End quote. Dean brushed the warning off and the group proceeded to have a charming dinner, Guinness told Parkinson. And he was dead the following Thursday afternoon in that car, said Guinness, who died himself in the year 2000. It was one of those odd things. It was a very, very odd, spooky experience. I liked him very much, too. I would have loved to have known him more. In September 2015, The Hollywood Reporter reported that to this day, people still visit the crash site and leave an assortment of tributes, including pictures, alcohol, and women's underwear. Johnny Puckett writes for website Motorious, asking, "The curse of the little bastard, fact, fiction, or horrible coincidence?" Nearly everyone is familiar with the name James Dean. This charismatic actor captured the eye of the world with his on-screen performances and intriguing the car community with his love of fast cars. Unfortunately, one of Dean's most memorable moments came in the form of tragedy on September 30th, 1955, when his Porsche slammed into another car going 85 miles per hour. As tragic as it is, if that were the end of the story, it could be chalked up to just a very bad accident that prematurely took the life of a beloved young actor. However, there's more to this story of Dean's little bastard. The remaining parts of the car, which was basically 4 wheels, a mangled body, and a twisted frame, were sold to George Barris, who sold 2 tires from the car and loaned the body to the LA chapter of the National Safety Council as as a traveling display. The tires the Barris sold reportedly blew at the same time, causing yet another accident, and the body fell from its display on multiple occasions. One time, injuring a bystander and the other killing George Barkis, a truck driver hired to transport the car to a road safety expo. While in storage, the car caught on fire for an unknown reason, and in 1960, while being transported from Miami to LA, the car mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again. In fact, there is only one part still remaining that is confirmed to be Dean's car, a transaxle that was found in a wooden crate in Massachusetts. Is this story proof of a cursed car, or is it simply all a series of horrible coincidences? The world may never know for sure. You will have to make up your own mind. What do you believe? Okay, I did a bit more digging about when the car went missing, and here's what I found. The original body of the Spider went missing in 1960 while being transported from a highway safety exhibit. The car's disappearance has fueled numerous theories over the years, including claims that it was hidden behind a false wall in Washington state, or that the disappearance was a hoax to keep the car's mystique alive. In 2005, the Volo Auto Museum offered a $1 million reward for the recovery of the car, but it's never been found. In 2021, the Porsche's original transaxle was discovered in Massachusetts and sold at auction for $382,000. That transaxle was sold to Zach Baggins, owner of the Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, adding to the car's legendary and cursed history. That alleged piece of the little bastard offered to my husband, and I'm talking 2 decades or more ago, I asked Doug about it, and he didn't remember exactly what piece of the car it was. He remembered the man as wanting to rebuild a car around that part, and he needed investors. My husband knew he had no real way to confirm that the part had originated with the little bastard, and he walked away. I'm glad. Relieved, actually. There are things that set off my spidey sense about James Dean's death. First, he died in Coloma. Coloma means the beautiful one. Second, the steel wraparound memorial plaque was paid for by a man named Sieta Onishi, who, thanks to the Hearst, as in William Randolph Hearst family, for donating the land for it. There's the strange warning from Alec Guinness that haunts me, and just yards away from the site of the crash lies the earth-eating San Andreas Fault. And speaking of fault, the driver that caused that accident, Donald Turnipseed, I'm not saying this was some type of dark ritual, but I don't know, it's weird. What do you think? Hit me up on socials. I'd love to know your feelings on this. One final note, and then I'll stop obsessing over this for the time being. A plaque at James Dean's memorial contains a quote from one of his favorite pieces of literature, The Little Prince. And the quote is, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." As I read this quote, my left ear began to ring. Hello, James. Hugging the Pacific Ocean north of Santa Barbara and due west from Lompoc and Solvang lies the wind-blown yellow grasses and live oaks of Vandenberg Space Force Base. It is a location rife with UFO or UAP sightings, but this bit of land wasn't always a military base. Santa Maria Times writes, "For generations, the land that's now home to Vandenberg Space Force Base has held fond memories, first for the Chumash, who called it home, and eventually for members of every branch of the military which has occupied it since. Only the U.S. Marines have not been stationed here." Coastal Chumash people inhabited the areas for time immemorial before Spanish explorers crossed the beaches, sand, and mountains. The Portola expedition of 1769 camped near what is today known as Point Arguello, In 1837, the 40,000-acre Rancho de Jesus Maria, now entirely enveloped by Vandenberg, was granted to Lucas Oliveira for his service in the Mexican army during Mexico's battle for independence from Spain. 7 years later, the city of Lompoc was founded, and Lompoc Landing Wharf was established on the rancho near Purisma Point. By 1883, the property had changed hands, and Ben Burton began selling off pieces of the rancho, including 120 acres, that allowed the Pacific Railroad to push its coastal line across the ranch in 1896. That stretch remains among the most scenic on the Coast Starlight Route, stretching from LA to Seattle, Washington. The U.S. Lighthouse Service later combined with the U.S. Coast Guard and was the new nation's first military occupant of that land. Point Arguello Light Station was put into service in 1901 in answer to repeated shipwrecks along the coastline north of Point Concepcion's Light Station, which had guided sailors since 1855. This base has evolved based on national and regional requirements. The first military unit protected mariners and shipping traffic going through the Channel Islands thoroughfare. The Army moved here when they needed an area to train for amphibious assault. It became key to testing and development of nuclear missiles, said Scott Bailey, chief historian of Space Launch Delta 30 at Vandenberg Space Force Base. According to historians and authors, including Jeffrey E. Geiger and Joseph T. Page II, Burton's wife sold the rest of the rancho to Union Oil in 1903. The company quickly sold much of the surface rights while retaining its mineral rights, and by 1935, Edwin J. Marshall was building his dream here. He renamed the guest portion of the ranch Marshallia, a name commemorated in the naming of the golf course, which succumbed to drought conditions in 2017. When Marshall's wife died in 1937, he left the area, leased out the land for cattle grazing, and Marshallia Ranch House and its outbuildings for a dude ranch. War brought the military calling, and in October 1941, the Department of War purchased Rancho Jesus de Maria for $750,000, as well as adjacent land grants to establish Camp Cook. Lieutenant Colonel John B. Madden served as its first commander. The peninsula housed prisoners of war from 1944 until May 1946, and the camp was closed a month later. The property was leased to local farmers for ag reasons, including grazing sheep, and back to the Dude Ranch operators who attempted to revive Marshallia but threw in the towel in 1944 due to lack of customer interest. Meanwhile, the U.S. was entertaining its first missile program. It was initiated in 1946 but canceled in 47 before it was restarted in 1951 under the Atlas title. Then came the blueprint for programs encompassing intercontinental ballistic missiles, satellite launch vehicles, manned spaceflight launch, and ballistic missile defense targets. The camp was reopened in 1950 to support training for the Korean War. It was home to the 13th and 20th Armored Divisions and 40th, 44th, 86th, and 91st Infantry Divisions until it went into caretaker status February 1953. Again, the land was leased out for grazing, according to the Lompoc Valley Historical Society. As the Cold War heated up, the peninsula was identified as an ideal location for guided missile training base and space launch site. The property was transferred to the U.S. Army in 1957 and renamed Camp Cook Air Force Base, and a new era began. By the time Zaccanino arrived on base as a civilian contractor the following autumn, the base had been renamed Yet again, this time as Vandenberg Air Force Base. The place was covered in wooden barracks that were used for everything, housing for GIs, offices, warehouses, anything and everything, because we were in a real rush to compete with Russia in support of the Cold War, he recalled. While structures for human occupation had to suffice, all energy was put into developing launch facilities. The construction of Space Launch Complex 10 was completed in 10 months. The land-based strategic base fields ensured the U.S. maintains dominance in security of the world with nuclear postures. The U.S. has done that from Vandenberg since the base opened in 1958, Bailey said. With airfields and missile silos scattered across the country, the importance of Vandenberg may be underestimated by civilians, but their everyday lives are impacted, particularly with the advent of commercial space programs. There are only 2 assured access to space installations in the whole country. Launching into polar Earth orbit, you can only do that from here for heavy lift space assets, Bailey said. Polar orbits allow coverage of the planet's entire populated surface twice per day, rather than the limited coverage of equatorial orbit. This is ideal coverage for GPS and Earth observation satellites like Landsat, which launched September 27th. That's where Google Earth comes from. You can't do that from the East Coast when you're launching into equatorial orbit, Bailey said. Vandenberg hosts the only continental U.S. launch site offering clear sailing after liftoff for polar orbit. Safety is the top priority for all launches. You can't launch anything if there's a chance of hurting a person or any type of asset. From Vandenberg, you don't overfly a populated area, not a single landmass until you get to Antarctica. So operating the Western Range, that's what the base does here, Bailey explained. When missile training and launch began, there were no on-base services for the likes of Zakogno. The closest place to pick up lunch was Lompoc, and delayed launch crews could go indefinitely without a meal in those early days, he recalled. It was like open season when I came in. People were coming into work from everywhere. It was amazing, and there was nowhere to stay. People were sleeping in their cars. People had taken out the front seat and made a bed. The population of Lompoc was 7,000 people, and when you went north of Pine Street, you were in a flower field, he said. With no housing available in Lompoc, many of the civilians found housing instead in Santa Barbara. We'd commute from there, and Highway 1 and 246 were like a snake's tail. It took you over an hour to go from Vandenberg to 101, then 101 from Winchester South was only 2 lanes, he recalled. The intersection was Las Cruces, was a death trap, but its service station and cafe offered a bowl of chili that Zakogno has never seen beat. The intersection was straightened 3 times, he said, to prepare for transporting the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile, though it ultimately arrived aboard Air Force C-5 aircraft. Zakogno remembers every launch in which he was involved, but that first of a Thor IRBM was particularly remarkable. That very first launch, it was a beautiful, sunny, warm day, clear as a bell, and it went west, he recalled. While crews worked toward launch after launch, the base was getting its own facelift. Marshallia Golf Course was established by 1960. E.J. Marshall's guest house was replaced with a parking lot, and the barn, bunkhouse, and other utility buildings were removed over the next several years. From 1959 to 1976, strategic construction concentrated on the first-generation missile systems, the Thor, the Atlas, and Titan IRBM, then intercontinental ballistic missiles of the Cold War. Launches range from publicized to clandestine, as much as a very public launch can be. 1959 saw the Corona Photo Reconnaissance satellite take flight, though it was clouded in secrecy. Before it was decommissioned in 1960, 1972, the system of satellites had completed 144 missions, capturing some 800,000 images, and marked the first mid-air recovery of a vehicle returning from space. In December 1959, the first launch of Titan 1 ended in failure, but the program went on until Titan 2 took the stage in May 1961. The following year, Vandenberg became the training ground for all ICBM crews, and President John F. Kennedy attended an Atlas D launch to observe firsthand. We progressed from weapon systems we were firing into the atolls west as weapons. Then we got involved in space applications and started going south and putting up satellites, and our booster weapons systems became space boosters, he said. In 1972, Vandenberg once again found itself in the spotlight when its Space Launch Complex 6 was identified as a launch site for NASA's Space Shuttle program. Construction of those facilities, including maintenance and checkout facilities, and a 3-mile-long runway once again boosted the regional economy. According to a Cal Poly Reach study of Vandenberg's economic impact, base-related operations contributed $3.46 billion to the gross domestic products of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties and the California economy. It supports some 14,000 jobs on the coast and more than 4,000 additional jobs statewide. Lompoc has an amazing opportunity. There have been setbacks. When Challenger was canceled, that program employed 10,000 people. The entire surrounding community suffered, but they bounced back with great investments in wineries, Bailey said. And now, he said, Lompoc stands to see further potential job growth, and with the rejuvenation of space programs through public-private partnerships. When you put assets into space, you get $10 back into the economy for every $1 spent on the program. When you can encourage use of one base like Vandenberg, it helps everybody in the surrounding community. He pointed to recent SpaceX Starlink program, which will ultimately include 42,000 networked low Earth orbit satellites to provide internet connectivity to people anywhere on Earth. That has a global impact, and it's a great public investment back into the economy, Bailey said. Vandenberg's newest stage began with the establishment of the U.S. Space Force in 2019. The base that enveloped Point Arguello, Rancho de Jesus Maria, and adjoining lands was dubbed Vandenberg Space Force Base on May 14, 2021. This base has always been used for the current needs of the nation. Now it's Space Force because space is a contested area, and Vandenberg is part of that fight, Bailey said. This is probably the most dynamic time in Vandenberg history. It's been an incredible time. From his own backyard, Zekagnino watched the spectacular November 23rd SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launch, NASA's first interplanetary defense test launch. DART is set to initially collide with an asteroid in autumn 2022, which means it already happened. I love where I live. I love what I did. Some of the projects I worked on were, boy, I tell you, were just phenomenal. Yep, I'd do it all over again, he ended. Okay, with all that activity in and around the skies of Vandenberg, it's no surprise that UAP sightings are regularly reported, from light squiggles to orbs to strings of strobe lights to tic-tac-shaped crafts. Sightings run the gamut. Santa Barbara Independent reported on a big red UFO that was brought up in a congressional hearing. Here are a few details. Reports of a huge hovering red square above Vandenberg Air Force Base in northern Santa Barbara County were shared at a House of Representatives panel's hearing on unidentified flying objects last Wednesday, July 26th. For the last 5 years, the U.S. has been slowly leaking bits of information about UFOs, or UAPs as they call them. The Indy reported in 2019 that there had been an overall uptick of interaction with aerial phenomenon since 2014, according to a spokesperson for naval operations. The football field-sized flying object at Vandenberg was spotted in 2003, according to testimony during the hearing held by the House Oversight Committee's National Security Subcommittee. A large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg when they observed a very large 100-yard sighted red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities, said Ryan Graves, a former U.S. Navy fighter jet pilot and founder of a nonprofit focused on UAP sightings. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off toward the mountains, he continued. Graves, the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, said the sighting occurred around 8:45 a.m., followed by a second sighting only hours later. He said witnesses provided him with information about the mysterious incidents as they had held onto, quote, official documentation and records, end quote, from the event over the years. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off, Graves said. Vandenberg is no stranger to anomalous phenomenon. In 1964, a test missile was destroyed shortly after launch at the base. The event was allegedly filmed by Lieutenant Robert Jacobs, who in 1982 came forward, saying a space object approached the missile and shot a plasma-type beam at the dummy warhead from 4 different angles. His superiors had told him to say nothing of the sighting. Graves, one of 3 former military members to testify at the July 26 hearing, based his discussion around 3 critical issues, including claims that UAP are in our airspace but are grossly underreported. Stigma around UAPs is powerful and challenges national security, and the government knows more about UAP than it's shared publicly, and excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden. The alleged sighting of a giant flying red square raises eyebrows. The credibility is questionable. How did others miss it? Nevertheless, reports of odd sightings are becoming more public and are being treated more seriously by government officials on both sides of the political spectrum. Last year, the Department of Defense created the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, for handling UAP reports. The U.S. intelligence community said earlier this year that UFO reporting by U.S. military personnel is increasing, but government officials have emphasized that only a small percentage of those reports could be described as anomalous. Many representatives at the hearing acknowledged UAPs as a potential threat, which requires government transparency and better understanding of UAPs. That includes efforts to encourage people to come forward with UAP reports, according to Representative Robert Garcia from Long Beach. Okay, and then I had to go and look up the most recent reports. In June 2025, in nearby Santa Maria, one person reported to newforce.org a silent white dot moving fast. And in May 2025, in San Luis Obispo, large silent aircraft lights that didn't reflect were reported as flying low, slowly over a hill, approaching a farm. And they said the memory is hard to focus on. Another report. In April 2025, this report came in from Santa Barbara. They said, I observed a noiseless orange ball in the sky, rapidly moving north to south as it went over the house, and it had an orange tail. I've put links to the National UFO Reporting Organization in the show notes. If you see something strange, be sure to report it there. If you live in California and your travel takes you through the central part of the state, there's an interesting spot you've got to see, a place where they are unearthing a sphinx from the sand dunes. No, I'm not kidding. DuneCenter.org explains. The 300-pound head of a sphinx that emerged from the dunes on California's Central Coast traces its roots to Hollywood, not Egypt. The artifact is now on display at a little-known archaeology site and wildlife refuge in the farm town of Guadalupe, 8 miles northwest of Santa Maria. The Dune Center works on excavating items unearthed from the massive set where Cecil B. DeMille filmed the silent movie The Ten Commandments in 1923. It's a registered archaeological site. The LA Times added more details. Most of the massive set remains buried in the coastal dunes outside Guadalupe in northern Santa Barbara County. When DeMille shot the film in 1923, he left behind the towering city of the Pharaoh, which stood 120 feet tall and included 21 sphinxes, each weighing 5 tons. The head from one of those sphinxes, measuring 3.5 by 6 feet, was among the artifacts revealed during the celebration on Friday at Guadalupe Nipomo Dune Center. It's in a 1910 craftsman house along Highway 1. This is the only set of its type from early Hollywood that still exists, Doug Jensen, executive director of the center, said in a news release. A giant concrete lion's paw is among the other ruins unearthed in October from the shifting sands. The Dune Center and documentary filmmaker Peter Brosnan, who has spent 30 years researching what is known as DeMille's Lost City, coordinated the archaeological excavation. Brosnan and DeMille's granddaughter, Cecile DeMille Presley, attended the unveiling. Here's my favorite bit. Smaller items on display include an actress's discarded compact and bottles of cough syrup. The film was shot during Prohibition, when liquor was illegal, so cast and crew members made do with the alcohol-infused remedy. The Dune Center Museum is open 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursdays through Sundays. Admission is free. Okay, if you've ever read the side of an old cough syrup bottle, which I have, then you know back then they contained traces of alcohol and cannabis. Travel Highway 1 north past Morro Bay. Stop to see the spectacle of many elephant seals living their best lives, then turn into the Hearst Castle parking lot. It's worth the ticket price. The wait and the ride up the hill, I promise. This place is something else. You'll hear the history as you wind up the hill to the massive Hearst Castle, about this being a zoo at one time. The opulence of this place is hard to wrap the brain around, but the drive and ride make one thing clear. The A-listers that came here sought privacy in this stretch of coastline. This property holds secrets, known as the Enchanted Hill. Its first secret, like San Jose's equally famous and mysterious Winchester House, this property was never completed. It's a perpetual work in progress. One exterior wall of the main structure reveals 3 stages of the project, frozen in time. Next, the property is actually one grand house, Casa Grande, surrounded by 3 guest houses. Each are larger than the average home. It was designed by a female architect, Julia Morgan, who was annoyed at William Randolph Hearst's rather constant tweaks to the plans. But hiring a female architect was a bold move at the time. And say what you will about Hearst. I'm looking at you, ghost of Orson Welles. But Hearst had previously hired the first female war correspondent and the first female editor of a Washington, D.C. newspaper. CNN reported that fact, by the way. If you've been to the property, which Hearst meant to be a simple, quiet retreat, then I've no doubt you remember the massive outdoor pool called Neptune. It was renovated in recent years to stop a leak, and it wasn't a small dribble. The leak was leaching out 5,000 gallons of water a day. The property was under construction for 30 years steadily, and it was completed in 1947. Hearst died just 4 years later, but he was on the property for a lot of that time to oversee the work. Now owned and operated by the California State Park System, it opened to public tours in 1958. Okay, remember that scene from The Lion King where Rafiki holds up a baby Simba and tells him, "Everything the light touches is our kingdom"? Hearst might have written that line while looking at the surrounding landscape at any angle. Yeah, he owned that much of the surrounding land. At one point, Hearst owned all of the land from the castle to the mountain. It's 34 miles to the north of Hearst Castle. At his peak, Hearst owned more than 250,000 acres of land around the castle. Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised then that the James Dean Memorial was on Hearst land. Considering those numbers, it was inevitable. One other secret fact: the Louvre had to settle for copies of a few French tapestries because the originals, they hang today in Casa Grande's assembly room. That's right. There are 4 original 16th century tapestries from the Deeds of Scipio Africanus series hanging on the walls. Some of the same tapestries are in the Louvre in Paris, but theirs are copies. CNN reports this: during the French Revolution, the set was broken up and sold, says Allen. Today, only these 4 at San Simeon and a fragment of another from the set are known to still exist. Back in the day, you had to be invited to Hearst Castle. Stars who stayed there included Clark Gable and Charlie Chaplin, as well as politicians like British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. President Calvin Coolidge. If you were lucky enough to receive a phone call or a handwritten note, you could stay for as long as you like. There was an old saying in Hollywood that there were 2 groups of stars: the ones who had been to Hearst Castle and the ones who had said they had been to Hearst Castle, Ellen says. So vast was the property that it had its own private airport. The site of it is where the visitor center is now. And one final secret: the gorgeous tiled walls in the indoor pool area, they were installed too perfectly. Morgan was not there for work for a bit of time while she recovered from a surgery. When she returned to the site, she made workers rip out the tiles, saying no one would believe these were ancient walls from Pompeii. Workers took down the tiles, used thin-set mortar, punched at the walls, and retiled. You can see those undulations today and other purposeful imperfections. Here's a bonus seedy secret I just can't resist. There are rumors that Hearst himself killed someone, though not on the Enchanted Hill, but at sea. Here's the secret scoop from Parisian Messy Nessie, who writes, "Now things start to get seedy. Hearst was a level-headed enough man. Sure, the castle was hardly dry during Prohibition, but he was never a big drinker or partier. He did, however, take a new life partner from the dramatic Hollywood set in actress Marion Davies. By the 1930s, Hearst was separated by distance, not law, from his wife, and Marion was his live-in mistress and the lady of the house. Unfortunately, Hearst was a jealous man, and Marion was a looker. One of the biggest rumors going around was that Marion was having an affair with Charlie Chaplin, who visited the estate often and had been invited to an intimate birthday party Hearst was throwing on his yacht for the father of the Western film genre, Thomas Ince. In the fall of 1924, a handful of guests boarded the lavish Oneida yacht off the coast of LA for the festivities until Ince fell violently ill and died. The doctor said it was acute indigestion, and it called for Ince's demise, while the yacht staff said a jealous Mr. Hearst shot Ince in the head, mistaking him for Charlie Chaplin. The LA paper ran the headline, "Movie producer shot on Hearst's yacht," and some onlookers swore they saw blood dripping from Ince's head on the boat, but the headlines were short-lived, likely because there was no one else you'd want to piss off more in the media business than Hearst. But the highly sensationalized tabloid reporting around Ince's death goes to show what a prominent place in the culture Hearst occupied. Okay, whoa, Nelly. That is not the full story. I did more digging and found out that Eans's wife bore witness to the lead up and death of her husband. He was being treated for heart issues prior to the yacht trip and had indulged in champagne and salted almonds, which were forbidden foods for his ulcer. And soon afterwards, he was suffering from indigestion. He and his wife were escorted off the boat where he was medically treated in Beverly Hills area when he died of a heart incident. The rumors of blood or a missed attempt at Charlie Chaplin, those were stories told at the time by the crew and grew over the months and the years. In fact, Patty Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter, wrote a work of fiction based on those lies about a wealthy, jealous man that shot his competition on a yacht trip. What Eanes deserves to be remembered for is his impact on feature films and the setup of major studios. He was a pioneer, and he left behind a blueprint still followed to the present day. There's another story I shared with you a long time ago with my soul sister Molly about Sister Irenita from the Central Valley, specifically Fresno. If you missed it, go back and take a listen. I've put links to that episode in the show notes. Sister Irenita was this young, beautiful nun who died too soon. Some say because she wasn't given the proper eulogy, she haunted the nuns' quarters and church. When I think back to the day when Molly texted me that she was going to the church, we wanted to give Sister Irenita peace. Well, it feels like a movie. And what happened then and afterwards? Even me, a fiction writer, I couldn't have made it up. Be sure to check out that episode sometime. But back on the salty coastline, there's a beach park where the Zodiac killed a couple while children he was taking for an outing waited for him to return in a car. I can't tell the story any better than the adults that endured this and shared their story of how they knew who they swear was the Zodiac, how their mother came to trust him for long stretches of time with her children, and the sad results. If you have Netflix, prepare to binge. This is the Zodiac speaking. One final stop on our strange, weird, and wonderful tour of Central California is La Purisma Mission. No visit to Santa Barbara is complete for me until I've driven north past Buellton to La Purisma Mission. I've taken my kids with me a number of times and had some really weird, interesting, spooky, ghostly experiences. One place that's open to the public and it's mid-building, I will never, ever stare into the shadows there again. Ever. If you've never been, plan to spend a few hours at least on the property. The visitor center is top-notch. The hike up to the mountain by the cross affords these gorgeous views. The gift shop is in part of the old infirmary and sure feels crowded with spirits to me. And the animals are something just sweet and special to be a part of. Here's more though from CaliforniaMissionGuide.com. Be sure to check out the link to their site in the show notes. They write, tucked away in Lompoc, California, La Purisma Concepcion is a beautifully preserved piece of early California history and one of the most notoriously haunted sites in the state. Built in 1787 as a part of the Spanish mission system, this site has witnessed centuries of devotion, disaster, and death. Over time, tales of paranormal activity have transformed the mission into a hotspot for ghost hunters, including an unforgettable feature on the popular TV show Ghost Adventures. Mission La Purisma was the 11th of the 21 California missions founded by Franciscan friars. Originally established near present-day Lompoc, the mission was destroyed in a devastating earthquake in 1812. Survivors relocated the mission to its current location, but hardship continued to shadow the grounds. Disease, conflict, and cultural upheaval claimed the lives of many native Chumash people and settlers alike. In 1824, the mission was the epicenter of the Chumash revolt, an uprising against the Spanish soldiers that ended in violence and death. These tumultuous events left a deep mark on the land, and some believe the spirits of those who died there still linger. Visitors and staff at the mission have long reported eerie occurrences. Common experiences include sudden cold drafts, disembodied whispers, and the sound of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Some claim to have seen full apparitions, friars in brown robes, shadowy figures moving between the adobe buildings, and even the ghost of a child near the old cemetery. One of the most famous spirits said to haunt the mission is a headless soldier thought to have died during the revolt. Others have heard weeping coming from the church and unexplained chanting in the chapel at night. In 2013, the crew from Ghost Adventures featured Mission La Purisma Concepcion in Season 8, Episode 11 of the show. Investigators Zach Baggins, Aaron Goodwin, and Nick Groff conducted an overnight investigation that produced several spine-chilling moments. During their stay, the team captured unexplained noises and a strange mist on the camera. Their equipment registered temperature fluctuation and EVPs, including what they believed to be a voice saying, "Get out." The team described an oppressive, heavy feeling in certain rooms and noted how quickly the atmosphere seemed to change from peaceful to hostile. Today, the mission is part of La Purisma Mission State Historic Park, and visitors can explore the buildings and grounds during the day. While most guests come to appreciate the history, a growing number are drawn by the mission's spectral reputation. Whether you are a skeptic or a believer, Mission La Purisma offers an eerie glimpse into California's haunted past, where the echoes of its history may still walk among the adobe walls and candle-lit chapels. Okay, I had an experience of hearing flute music, not unlike what the Ghost Adventures crew had. And I experienced something weird in that part of. And I experienced the scariest bit when I was looking into there was a place where it was supposed to be like a kitchen pantry, and next to it was just kind of a dark, unmarked area. And I got this feeling almost like somebody being killed there or dying there. And it was like a suffocating feeling. The only time I ever had a feeling that was as sharp and clear when I was at Alcatraz, and I was in a part of the cafeteria and I had to leave. And I found out later from the recording that was delayed for some reason that two things were happening at once. One, they were telling me on the recording that that's where a prisoner died with a shiv cutting his throat. And I was also getting texted that my dog Quincy was suffocating in his kennel, and they were able to revive him. But I found out later he had this paralysis. It's a very rare thing that happens to golden retrievers where part of their windpipe is paralyzed open, and he was suffocating. Really weird. Very strange. And the cemetery, to me, there's this part of the property where there's a cemetery, and I found a penny there and I left it on a grave there, but it felt super peaceful to me. If you're eager to explore more Central California mysteries, Google The Watchers or the Madonna Inn or the Octopus Garden Mystery. There's so much more to learn and love about this region. Until next week, stay curious. I love you.